that up. Great. Well, welcome everybody to our Mental Fitness Advancing Your Careers session today, and a slightly different take to the conversations we've had before. I'm Jenny Pelling. I'm the Director of Apprenticeship Development and Diversity at Kaplan, and I'm joined by Ross McWilliam, who many of you have met already, and a new guest called Haider Ali, who I would have introduced to you as our level 7 apprentice, but Haider has just completed his apprenticeship this week. So many congratulations to you. I'm really pleased to be talking today with you about confidence and networking, and I shall hand over to Ross. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Jenny. Hello, everybody. You'll have me for about 20-25 minutes, then Haider will take up the ropes and give you an insider's view of what it's like on making a change in the world and making it very positive. So that's our title. We just mentioned that by Jenny. So very practically based today, which is very important. I think always applying something to get that positive change is a very positive way to view the world. I always talk about this very quickly, our group agreement. People feel confident and to ask questions. Ask me questions whenever you want, either verbally or in the chat box. I'll hang around afterwards as well. Anything we've talked about that you're interested in or that's bugging you, I'm not going to rush off. So just to make sure you've got that security from myself and the rest of the team. So learning outcomes today, we're going to look at these 5 things. Okay, 6 even. Personal. There you go, Haider. Brilliant, is in there. So we'll look at self-esteem and confidence and bravery, and we'll take it down a level from that to emotional confidence. Then we'll touch a little bit on leadership, because some of you guys will be leaders at some point in the future. And then we'll talk briefly about opportunities and being prepared that will lead us very directly into Haider's story there. So if I talk about self-esteem, people have an idea what that means. And for me, it's crucial, because self-esteem is our self-worth, how much we believe in ourselves. And if we have that, we can develop the confidence, which is not being scared to say or do or think things. So it's almost like an umbrella. The handle of the umbrella, I call the self-esteem. If you've got that self-worth, you believe in yourself, you can then open up the canopy of confidence, not to be scared, to try things, to have a go at something, to express yourself, or even, as we're going to find out, just to listen. That's a very confident thing to do. Now, I've linked bravery in there because sometimes it feels we've got to be very brave in the world. Okay. And so Brené Brown talks about that. And she says, you can't do anything brave if you're wearing the straitjacket of what people will think. And over again, in the 30 years I've worked with young people and older people to a certain extent, is that we don't do things because we're scared of what people might say or think. Okay. And that's really important, that we don't let other people influence how we think and behave, because that could limit our opportunities. So those 3 concepts go together. Okay. So emotional confidence, okay, I'll come on to that in a second, but basic confidence is something that I've just said before. It's how we operate in the world. We think things, we say things, we do things. Now, it's a learned behavior. So at birth, we're all born with the same amount of potential. Yeah, but different things happen in our environment, our frame of reference, our parents, genetics, opportunities, and it can't be ring fenced, which means that you've got to constantly keep working at your confidence. You can't say, I've got it, I'll always have it, it's mine. You've always got to keep challenging yourself on that, because it can very quickly be lost. And it's linked to how we see the world. And that is primarily our past experiences, but it's our day-to-day experiences, how we interpret the world. So that's the basic confidence, which, you know, most people will probably understand, that's linked to self-esteem. Now, emotional confidence is slightly different, and it's knowing when to speak and when to keep quiet, to actually motion somebody else to speak. It's understanding people's non-verbal and verbal communication skills. And these are things that are very powerful for us. And we probably do these, but we're maybe not fully aware of the impact of them. So, you know, a false image of confidence might be, I can talk loud, I can stand up, and I can hold an audience. And that is one aspect, but one aspect only. For me, emotional confidence is knowing when to be quiet. when to facilitate somebody else, when to observe what's happening and contribute to that environment in a positive way, not to hijack it. And I think sometimes people mix that up a little bit with confidence of hijacking. And a good example is this confidence curve. I'm going to explain this to you very quickly and briefly now. So I'm just going to upload it for you to start off at that position there. So on the left-hand side, we've got our self-esteem, our self-worth. And in the middle of that curve is our confidence curve. So the higher that is, the more confidence we've got. We believe in ourselves, self-esteem, we can achieve things. And the bottom axis is about time. So everything in life generally takes time. You might be at a position in your life now where it's this box top left where we call it the unconscious incompetent. So you're not knowingly aware that you can be quite incompetent. And some people in this box can have this like little false confidence. You see a little line at the start from 0 there, it goes up. Our confidence goes up because initially we might have that false confidence. We think we're fantastic, but very quickly we start being conscious that we're not quite as good as what we thought. And when we realize we're not as confident as what we could have been, what we thought we had before, we can actually then start losing that confidence. We're much more aware. And that becomes pressure for next time we have to perform. But if then we're working at confidence, because I said it couldn't be ring fenced, and we're doing things of getting feedback, practicing and preparing, learning and challenging and understanding, then slowly we can get into this next quadrant, the bottom right, where we're consciously competent. Now, that's not a bad place to be. And as you can see, the arrow's going up, our confidence is increasing, but we've got to keep working at it, and which is fine, but it can get tiring. Where we want to be in life is top right. We're in flow, we're thriving, we're not surviving, and it's easy. We don't notice we're doing it. And that almost creates more confidence because you're relaxed in what you're doing, you're bringing people towards you, using your emotional confidence of listening rather than trying to perform all the time. And I think that's when you hit that high level of confidence, basic and emotional. So that's something that takes a long while to do. But as you can see, practice and feedback are crucial in this, and I'll come back to that very shortly. So we've talked about a little bit emotional confidence. There's a reminder for you what that is. And if I want to be very succinct on this, when I talk about emotional confidence, it's in red. Making the right choices and not always proving people wrong. And I think it's a very important thing to do, to hold your horses sometimes, to understand what's going on. You don't always have to jump in and put your opinion across. And it's knowing when to do that and when not to do that. And for me, that's emotional confidence. Some people call that emotional intelligence. And there is a simple crossover on that. And I think you've probably already got this, but if you become more aware of it, you can develop it to your benefit. And one person who's done that is a guy called Dale Carnegie. He wrote many books in the early 20th century about how to get the most out of life, how to be successful. And a little quote there, it says, "Any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, but it takes character and self-control to be understanding and forgiving." And in essence, what he's trying to say there is that you don't always have to stand up and profess that you're the best in the room. In fact, he talks about a dinner party he once went to where the host was telling this story. And the story was like, say, 75% truth, factual, but there was some elements of doubt in there and things that were untruths. And this Dale Carnegie was listening to him, and he was tempted to interrupt it and say, "You got that wrong, and you should have done this, and it could have been this point," but he didn't. And he let him finish the story. Everyone was none the wiser. And afterwards, he went over and talked to his host and said, "I like your story. I didn't understand that bit about this fact here. I thought it was this." So he did it in a one-to-one without the gaze of the audience. And he did it in such a way that the host didn't feel challenged or belittled, even on a one-to-one. And I think it's very powerful, that very powerful way to understand that. As I said before, this is very much closely linked to emotional intelligence. And Richard Boyatzis is an international leader on this. And again, I'm using this slide to highlight the fact that you guys, many of you, will be leaders at some point. So Richard talks about effective leadership. And when he says this, he doesn't mean about someone having all the bright ideas, I'm the cleverest, follow me, I am the leader of this group. He talks slightly differently. He talks about building relationships with people, understanding their emotional, rational, logical, intellectual needs, and reminding yourself daily that it's not all about you. Okay. So that dictatorial, controlling leadership we do see from time to time. He said it's got a sell-by date on. And if you can work with your team, understand them, and you don't always have to lead from the front, that's when over time you'll get that emotional intelligence and the emotional support from your staff as well. So again, if you want to look up on him and watch some videos, nice and short, 2 to 3 minutes long, some really good stuff about that emotional intelligence with confidence. So I mentioned this briefly before. I'm a big believer in this from my teaching days, that it's very rare that you can do anything spontaneously without any preparation. You might be able to get away with it, but rather than get away with something, wouldn't you want to do something that's really good and improving and purposeful? So we've got to prepare. I'm a big believer as well in demonstrating. I often talk about Michael Caine when he's learning his lines. He won't just read them, he'll read them out loud to an audience to make sure he's got it and get the feel of the audience. So that's something I believe in demonstrating, quite literally with people. Getting the feedback, the 360-degree feedback, what went well, what could have gone better, what will they not do next time is crucial. And then we start polishing them, performing, practicing, preparing again. And ultimately in all this, developing your confidence, you've got to see that future, vision that future goal where you're in the job you want to do, you're doing really well, you've got effective emotional leadership, and things are going well. And in the middle, we've got that little zone, which I can't refer to. We can stay in our comfort zone all our lives, and that might be fine for some people. But I'd like to think we can get into that stretch zone from now and again. We may occasionally touch the red zone, but the danger of the red zone is that we can create undue necessary panic and stress that can really shrink us over time. So stretching's good, red zone's not too good. Comfort zone is where I don't want to be. Yeah. Okay. So doing really well. I read this report last month from the Harvard Business Review, and I found it quite interesting because it talked about the aspect of overconfidence. Is that such a bad thing? And when is it an asset and when is it a liability? You might be somebody in the audience now thinking, I haven't got enough confidence. Give me more confidence. I'll be overconfident and I'll have that. But you'd be surprised that it can put people off almost more than shyness and not contributing. So if you're overconfident verbally and you're doing a task together and the task is unsuccessful, then the status takes a hit on that one, because you've actually articulated to people that this is going to go well, I believe this is going to go well, and it doesn't, and then they hold you to account. So, but if you're overconfident non-verbally, your body language and your facial, expressions, we talked about the face having 6,000 to 10,000 expressions. So if you're confident in terms of your body language and your facial expression, but the task is unsuccessful, your credibility is still intact. That's saying to me, maybe, if you're not quite sure, maybe say a bit less, but act like you know what you're doing, and you'll get away with it if the task is unsuccessful. But here's a good one caveat for you. When being overconfident on paper, like in interviews, your credibility destroyed, you're found to be unsuccessful lying. Now, that's a really important one. Yeah. So be careful that they overstate how good you are. And it's hard to hold people accountable for overestimating their abilities and knowledge when they express their confidence in non-verbal ways. So that's the key takeaway. The non-verbal ways, it's difficult if you get something wrong for people to put the blame on you, but you felt as if you knew what you were doing and people bought into you. You don't take a hit. And we call that cognitive dissonance, believing the facts, but not the messenger. Okay, just some interesting stuff there for you guys to think about. So how do we then get these opportunities out of the formal framework of life to enhance our lives through relationships, through careers, jobs, meetings with people? And for me, it always starts off with being a custodian of your expertise area. And I once met a world memory champion online a few years ago. And one of the first things he said to me is, are you a custodian of your area? And I wasn't sure what he meant. And what he was saying was, do you just not read the books? Do you look at blogs and vlogs and ask people's opinions? Do you constantly search for this internally within your organization, or externally in the outside world? And it was an interesting comment that made me think, am I becoming a custodian of something? And that you've got to constantly top up, like confidence. You can't ring fence it. You've got to keep looking at the latest trends. You don't have to accept the latest trends, but when you're abreast of contemporary issues, then you can say you're becoming a custodian of your area. And as I said before, writing articles, blogs and vlogs, and contributing discussions online, understanding where people are coming from, because the world, as we all know, is changing rapidly at the moment. In the last few years, we've gone through a massive change cycle. And in work and outside work, inquiring at your appraisals, what is it that I can do differently or better or more of that's going to enhance my career prospects? Asking management and external management people involved, stakeholders in your company. That's a really powerful way to do that. And I was working with a head teacher recently, and she was inquiring about the governors and how they could influence them in a positive way for her role in the school, developing it with the community. So you can't rest in your laurels. I think it's very important to remember that. In opportunities in meetings to speak, you must have plenty of meetings. And do you ask beforehand, is an opportunity, would you like me to speak about some aspect of the agenda today? Is there something I can contribute towards? Showing that willingness and motivation and then being prepared for it is a very powerful thing that stands you out from other people. Volunteering is a very powerful thing as well, very powerful indeed. And whether that's yourself or mentoring others and speaking at careers events to future apprentices, a bit like we're doing today with Heather, putting something back into the community. I think it's so powerful. We always think everything must be attached to money and that very clear career path. But I do think volunteering and mentoring are very powerful ways to understand how things work and to get yourself in the right position to be able to share that expertise. And network, I know Heather's going to talk about network, and I've done networking so much over the years. It's one of those things that when I first did it, and maybe for a few years, I was very forthright and direct and obvious, almost like pushing my business card into somebody's hand before they said hello. And I've learned a few things over the years. There's a guy called Will Kentish and talks about networking online. And I picked a few things up from him and a few things from personal experience as well. And when you're talking to people, fewer I's and more U's. So when we say I did this and I can do that, just catch yourself. It's more about them. It's more about yous than me's. Yeah. Don't be pushy, especially with business cards or e-cards. And if you've got this really well and you have the conversation good, you're interested in somebody else, the best outcome is where they ask you for your business card, not you giving it to them. Okay. So that's a really good test for you. If you've done a good job of networking, they'll be so curious about what you do. Have you got a business card, please? That you know you've won that one. Open body language means basically not to cross something. Include people in your eye contact as groups of 2 to 3 to 4. Don't put your back to somebody, which a lot of people do, sometimes unintentionally, and sadly, sometimes intentionally, if somebody's got more to offer than you. So be very careful that you include people, because that person you might not think might be important to you, but they'll probably know somebody who is. So don't try and exclude people. Introduce other people. What a fabulous, simple way to do something. This is Haider Ali, an apprenticeship just past his qualifications, doing this. And all of a sudden, the focus comes off you, which is a good thing. You're showing that emotional confidence, letting somebody else speak, giving them the platform, introducing them. That's a very powerful way to show that you're emotionally confident. And it's something I've seen done very well. And 3 questions when you're talking to somebody, I love these because they're easy to remember, is what do you do? Okay, it's a simple one, yeah. And most people, when you take an interest in them, they'll be off and running, yeah. And then you say, how do you get into that work? You're showing more interest and they're off and running again. And the last question is, what success have you got at the moment? What are your plans for the future? So it's a great one. It really is. So 3 simple questions, and I guarantee that will take a little bit of time if somebody wants to talk to you. And at the end of it, they'll feel like you've really listened to them. And that's up to you to do that. Yeah. So 3 great questions there on networking for you to do. And finally, being prepared. I used to work as commercial manager at Preston North End Football Club, literally 20 years, almost to the day. And they're still paying me now through a pension. And I didn't go for a formal interview. I actually was at the match watching a game. And I was sat next to the director's box, and I heard the secretary, who I knew sort of a little bit, not too much, not first name terms, but she said to the chairman, our pitch side announcer hasn't turned up today. What shall we do? And the chairman said, well, just don't do it. And then the secretary said, well, we need to do it for the lottery numbers and introducing some former players and something else and something else. And I found myself just saying, excuse me, I can do it. And I shouted across. And they sort of knew me because I was teaching at Preston College at the time. I was a bit of a, I won't say a safe pair of hands, but I was known. I was known for all the good things. And they said, are you sure? I said, yeah, no problem at all. Tell me what to do. And I went down to the pitch. And I wouldn't say I wasn't nervous, but I thought it's an opportunity. And when I get like in that situation, I always think what it's going to feel like afterwards if I didn't do it as well, the referrals, and I wouldn't be able to live with myself. So I thought, I don't want that feeling afterwards if it didn't go so well. I got nervous. So I did it. And as soon as I walked up and gave the microphone back, the chairman met me and said, would you like a job? It was as quick as that. And I worked there for 5 years because I opened my mouth and I was listening to what was happening. The other things is there's a bus stop there. When I was studying in Canada, I was at a bus stop once, and again, I was talking to people, but also listening. It's not just about talking. I was listening to somebody, and they were saying they're one of these sports camps in Canada. And I said, I'm studying near there at the moment. Do you need some help for the summer? And he said to me, what do you do? I said, I can do this sport, that sport, blah, blah, blah. And I got a job from listening to a conversation that lasted 6 months, 6 weeks into 6 months eventually. So you never know. And the lifts, the elevator's a great one. Yeah. When you get in a lift with somebody, you've got them in a enclosed space, so they can't get away from you. So that's a good chance to actually corral your opposition. And maybe then, you know, if you listen to people, talking to people, maybe something's going to happen there very positive. But it's being prepared and knowing who you are, being able to say what you do in a sentence. I'm Ross, I help improve performance with different groups of organizations. And what do you mean by that? And then you're off and running. Yeah. So being prepared is being open, being listening, have a one-line statement that you can use that builds intrigue. Okay. Very powerful stuff that. And it's, and I'll tell you something for free in football, there aren't that many interviews. They're almost held behind closed doors spontaneously. And a bit of, dare I say, a bit of nepotism is in there as well with football clubs. And when owners come and take over clubs, they have all the team around their entourage, and they tend to get a lot of the jobs. And I'll tell you that for no reason, that just happened to me as well. So what have we learned today? Confidence can't be ring-fenced. It must be practiced, performed with that feedback loop. Don't be scared of getting feedback. You don't always have to accept it, but it gives you an alternative viewpoint. Be congruent with your face and body, so you're giving off that clear, consistent message. And if you do that, even when you're wrong, you can almost be right. Yeah. Knowing when to speak and how to lead, effective leadership, understanding the emotions of your team and listening to them and letting them take the floor more times than you probably would do yourself, which is a good way of doing something. Always looking for opportunities and never be desperate. Don't be trying to plead with somebody. Don't beg. Yeah, just being around, being opportunities. And as I said before at Preston North End, be prepared. And that is, be prepared with a statement, but be prepared with your life and what skills you're learning, what courses you've been on. Always upskilling yourself is that make sure you're getting prepared then, so you are becoming, as I said before, that custodian of your area. And finally, always support others. Even if you think it's nothing to do with you or nothing to do with your job or nothing to do with your future job, you're surprised how far goodwill and kindness can go in the world. Yeah. And it's one of those things, it's the beautiful karma. So those are some of the things we learned this morning already. And the further support is there. And I'll hand over to Jenny.
Thank you, Ross. And all of those conversations about owning your area and giving something back couldn't be better embodied, really, by our next speaker, Haider Ali, who is going to talk to us about his experience of networking and projects and advancing career. So Haider, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thanks, Ross, for covering all of that amazing stuff.
And just one more slide, I think, isn't there, to go
put the slide on for you. There you go.
Lovely. Thank you.
Amazing. So, yeah, hi, everyone. My name's Haider, as Jenny and Ross said introduced earlier. And yeah, recently just completed a 4.5-year management accounting apprenticeship at Rolls-Royce. And I think it's always helpful to give a bit of insight as to why I chose to do an apprenticeship and just a little bit about my apprenticeship journey to date. So I started my apprenticeship at 18 years old instead of going to university, which was quite a shock to most people, I think. A lot of them expected me to go to university because I was quite an academic student. On paper, I was kind of like the ideal candidate just to go to like a Russell Group university. So I think it was quite surprising when I actually challenged that assumption, because I wanted to have sort of the best of both worlds. I wanted to have that practical on-the-job work experience, but also wanted to make sure that I wasn't compromising on my education. And I felt like an apprenticeship at this level was just like the best way to get those two things that I was after, especially because I knew how hard it would be sometimes for graduates to sort of break into the workplace, and a lot of entry-level jobs especially often want more experience than you actually have as a student or recent graduate. So that's kind of like the main drivers as to why I did an apprenticeship. And in terms of the structure of what my sort of program looked like, so it was a 4.5-year scheme, as I mentioned, and it involved working in a range of different finance placements across the business. So it was a great way to just get a feel for what it's like to work in all these different teams across finance. And obviously joining so young, it's all very new to you. It's your first sort of exposure just to like the corporate working environment. You're learning lots of different things on top of just learning the actual sort of day job. And in terms of what a typical week looks like for me, so for the first 2 years of my apprenticeship, I studied for the level 4 AAT qualification, and then I progressed on to for the remaining 2.5 years for the level 7 CIMA qualification. And throughout this 4.5 years, I've been a Kaplan student. So one day a week, I would be going to sort of my Kaplan sessions, either sort of online currently with the COVID environment, or in-person tuition pre-COVID, and studying for my professional qualifications for one day a week. And then the remaining 4, I would be at the workplace, working from home or working in the office or pre-COVID, to get that sort of fit between sort of being a student for 20% of my time and then being an employee for the rest of the week. And I found that was a really great way for me to, like I said, get the best of both worlds. And I really enjoyed having things that I learned being directly applicable to what I was doing sort of in the workplace. It was a great way for the knowledge to really sink in. I'm a big advocate for experiential learning. So I think until you actually do something, it's very hard for it to click. You can sort of study everything you need to know from a book, but it's almost like sort of passing your driving test. You could do the theory, but until you actually drive the car, you're not going to be able to really get anywhere and understand how to operate the vehicle. So I think apprenticeships are quite similar in that sense too, in that yes, you can learn all the technical sort of educational knowledge on the side, but you do need to apply it into the workplace for it to really click and sink in. So that's a little bit about my sort of apprenticeship at a very top level. And I think because I've been in so many different placements as part of my apprenticeship scheme, I've always felt a little bit like, I guess like a new starter, constantly going through this learning curve of, I don't really know what I'm doing, learn on the job, and then, oh, I think I know what I'm doing, kind of similar to the graph that Ross showed earlier. And then before you know it, you're back to the beginning because you've rotated into your next placement. So you kind of get used to being uncomfortable and actually not knowing a lot and going through the motions of that sort of confidence curve. And with that, you get a lot of responsibility as well with projects. So I think the biggest sort of example that comes to mind is I was working in the group reporting team within my organization. So that's basically the team that works on all the financials for the annual report. So it's very sort of like high profile work. At the end of the day, when the company announces its results, we've played a huge part in putting together a lot of the information that goes out into the public domain. So I think as an apprentice, that was like a really exciting opportunity, but also very sort of nerve-wracking to think that I'd be working, I'd be contributing to work that, you know, will be going out into the public, and I'd be working with sort of external auditors from a big 4 accounting firm at the same time as part of the day job to ensure that, you know, everything that the company produced was accurate and painted a fair representation of like the company's performance, etc. So as an apprentice, I kind of got used to being in the hot seat, and it can be very scary when you take on a project at first, or when you're perhaps learning a new job and you're early in your career. And I think the key thing to always remember is to see any kind of project or challenge, no matter how big or small it is, just sort of view it as like a developmental opportunity. It's something you're going to grow through rather than just go through. And then by the end of it, you'll hopefully feel a lot more confident, having gone up the confidence curve, similar to how Ross mentioned, and you'll be able to think, oh, actually, yeah, that wasn't too bad, sort of in hindsight, and I could probably stretch myself a little bit more. It's echoing that point about stretching yourself outside your comfort zone, but not too much into the red zone that Ross mentioned. So projects are a great way of seeing perhaps the skills that you'd like to obtain, but you don't quite have yet, or you just need to polish, or just things that you're interested in and you want to develop yourself further. So I definitely recommend for you to really put yourself out there with projects if you feel like you can add value, even if you're not 100% confident. 50% is sometimes enough. It's that nice balance of, I think I know what I'm doing, but actually there's a bit of a stretch and a challenge here as well to help me grow by the end of it. And then kind of reapplying that logic will just be able to give you that real sort of growth over your career journey. When you look back, you think, I could never have done this at 18 years old, but like sort of 4 or 5 years on, actually that doesn't seem too bad in hindsight. And I think as an apprentice, I've had so many of those moments of, I don't know what I'm doing, why am I even here? That kind of imposter syndrome kicks in. And then you're like, oh, actually, this isn't too bad. And then you're like, oh, before you know it, you're into the flow of work and you think, actually, this is quite easy. Okay, I know what I'm doing now. And then before you know it, you start a new project and the sort of motion continues. So I think the more you get involved in those types of projects, the more you can feel yourself being on the curve and having that self-awareness of, actually, this is just, I'm at this stage of the process. It's normal for me to feel a bit confused or slightly less confident, and just acknowledging that so that you don't actually throw in the towel a bit too early and just keep persevering and keep going, so you can get to that place where you do feel confident and you've developed as a person. And those kind of projects help you to develop all kinds of skills. So hard skills in terms of what you might be picking up on the day job. For example, in that particular role, I learned a lot about like the systems the company was using, the tools it specifically used, specific sort of accounting knowledge that I was bringing into the role. But I think more importantly, soft skills, because I think soft skills get a bad rep in the sense of people think, oh, soft skills are a bit wishy-washy. But personally, I think soft skills are actually more important than hard skills, because when you change roles, hard skills will kind of be a bit obsolete, a bit redundant. You can't always transfer hard skills across. Whereas soft skills, no matter what your domain, if you were to even sort of go into another function, for example, from finance into another function, or work in a completely different part of your organization, those soft skills are transferable. Those are your things like your teamwork, your communication, your problem solving, and your attention to detail. Those things, it doesn't really matter what you're doing, because it's more about your personal development as a human, as opposed to just like, oh, my specific role as an accountant, for example. So I'd really focus on finding projects that help you to develop those soft skills, because you can actually develop those outside of work as well, similar to how Ross mentioned. Volunteering in your local community, doing projects outside of a work setting, something sort of totally different. And an example that comes to mind is, for example, I did sort of like maths tutoring for a local secondary school. It was sort of outside my domain in the sense of it was within a school environment, not really within the workplace, but it kind of leveraged some of my knowledge and insights of having a maths background and working with numbers and feeling confident enough to sort of pass that knowledge on and add value to someone else. So there's lots of opportunities you can sort of find in your local community as well, to be honest. There's always a need for volunteers in all different kinds of domains. So I'd really encourage you to, if you don't perhaps feel comfortable putting yourself forward for a project at work, to at least do something in your local community. It's relatively low risk and you don't really have that pressure of like, oh, I don't want to let down my manager, and you don't really have that sort of high sense of expectation that sometimes you feel a bit of pressure from in the workplace. And then pivoting on to, I guess, the topic of networking, which is also a really big and important thing, and something that I've seen, sort of like immense value and importance in terms of my career to date, because I think networking has become a bit of a buzzword as well. So I think before I sort of get into how you can sort of network, I think it's important to clarify just what it is. I think when you first start your career, especially when I did, everyone was like, yeah, you need to network. Networking is key. Your network is your net worth, and all these kind of phrases and terminologies thrown around. But sometimes you think, but what actually is it? And I think when you boil it down, sort of my definition of networking is just communicating or having a conversation with someone outside of your immediate circle. That's literally all it is, just talking to somebody new. So when you frame it in that sense, it makes it a lot more human, as opposed to this really sort of like corporate and robotic sort of kind of sales pitchy, sort of like, here's my business card type vibe that Ross mentioned. And it's actually, oh, you seem quite interesting, I'd like to have a chat. And I think the key thing to remember about networking, which is something that Ross mentioned as well, is to actually shift the focus on them. You need to come with a sort of perspective of giving rather than taking. The whole idea is that it comes from a place of service. You're looking at actually, how can I help you, or how can I learn more about you as a person, as opposed to, oh, I want to know about you, or I want to know how I can get that job or get that promotion. And it's less about sort of take, and more about sort of giving. And funnily enough, you'll find that actually by giving more in those networking interactions, you actually receive more, which sounds a bit sort of counterintuitive, because you think, oh, if I just go in with the angle of trying to take and get knowledge from this person, as opposed to sort of giving or adding value myself, surely I'd receive more. But you'd find that by giving, you don't actually expect anything in return, and that person has a much sort of more positive impression of you, and it creates those sort of really amazing opportunities for those really sort of serendipitous moments of just sort of like, I just literally sparked a conversation with this person and got a job, for example. Or I just, I was just interested in learning about what this person did, and they offered me like a shadowing opportunity, or they offered to coach me, for example. So I think it's a great way to be able to find people like mentors and coaches, and even just friends, to be honest, because again, those things, people think that it has to be really rigid and you have to like almost contact someone and say, will you be my mentor, or will you be my coach? Whereas actually, if you just sort of have a general chat with them and ask a little bit about them and take an interest into what they're doing, both inside or outside of work, they're more likely to reciprocate that in the sort of networking relationship. And they almost become a mentor without you even mentioning the word, or they might even become your coach without you explicitly saying that, you were sort of seeking out a coach. So I'd say just keep a really open mind with regards to your networking interactions. Always focus about giving rather than taking, similar to how Ross mentioned. And yeah, I think my key challenge to everyone listening today would be to have a look around your organization, or maybe it's some people outside of work that you want to sort of focus on. And perhaps it's someone, I don't know, perhaps it's someone who's doing your dream job and you just want to learn a little bit more about how to get to that position. Maybe you're taking an interest into what career moves they did before they got there, or what types of experiences and knowledge is required to get to that certain stage. Perhaps you need certain professional qualifications, for example, to do that particular role, or perhaps it's worthwhile getting experience in certain departments to be able to then progress into that kind of role. Or another example could be, perhaps you just find someone really interesting and you just want to learn a bit more about the work that they're doing outside of their sort of 9 to 5, and you take a real key interest in just passion projects, I guess, that they're working on, and you want to contribute in some way. You might just say, I'm really interested in what you're doing, I'd love to support your work, can I sort of get involved? And that's another great sort of way of networking without even realizing. Adding value in that sense can be really sort of eye-opening, and you can see the effect it slowly has on your career as you make this kind of interaction. A really simple example that comes to mind with myself is like book recommendations. So someone messaged me saying, just earlier today actually, saying, oh, you sort of mentioned a book in passing when we last spoke. Do you mind if I just get the official book recommendation from you? And again, just things you've read, whether it was a podcast, a book, or something like that, that you think, oh, actually, you might benefit from this. And sort of adding value in that sense can be a really key way for you to build those relationships. And then once you've given, then they're more likely to then sort of give to you, or in terms of like for you to receive something in return. So if you were to say, oh, do you have any book recommendations for me, for example, then it becomes more natural. Whereas if you were to just start off with that angle of, oh, I just want to extract information from this person, it becomes a bit harder and a bit sort of, yeah, it becomes a bit harder to connect with them on a more human level. So always come in with the angle of trying to give and to add value, and you'll see how, without even trying, all these amazing opportunities and all these sort of like hidden doors open. Especially when you're navigating your career, there's a lot of sort of like hidden doors, similar to how Ross mentioned, with regards to opportunities that don't always exist in the formal domain. There's a lot of sort of articles about the kind of hidden job market, for example, and a lot of those opportunities are accessed through things like networking. It's just having that relationship with someone so that when the right opportunity arises, you're front and center in their mind, and they perhaps reach out to you before they formally advertise a job, for example. So it's a great way to get those sort of opportunities at work that sometimes aren't always advertised on the job board as well. So yeah, closing challenge to everyone listening today, I would say, is to try and put some time in someone's diary that you perhaps haven't spoken to. It could literally just be a 30-minute catch up, or perhaps you just want to go with a coffee. Um, yeah, go for a coffee with someone you haven't spoken to before, at work or outside of work, and just get to know them and focus more on just listening and asking those kind of questions that Ross mentioned to get to know more about them. And you'll notice that by not even doing a lot, as in just taking more of a passive approach and just focusing on them, that they feel like they've gotten so much more out of the conversation, and they sort of look forward to building a relationship with you going forwards. And you'll be surprised at how much people reciprocate those kind of interactions. You can sometimes in your head feel like, why would they want to talk to me? Or that's just a bit awkward, or surely they'll just decline that invite. But people do like talking about themselves. Like if you take a genuine interest in what someone's doing, of course they're going to want to tell you about it. If they can sort of help you through their experience just by literally talking about what they've done today, that's actually a really sort of easy way for them to sort of add value themselves and just to get to know someone new. You might not realize, but your perspective could actually shift a way of thinking in their mind as well. So they might actually get a lot from just engaging with you. Sometimes you get so focused on, oh, how should I add value, that you forget that, you know, it's a two-way street. It's a mutual relationship. So they'll get value from you and vice versa. So don't talk yourself out of the idea before you even do anything. So that would be my challenge to everyone listening today, just to take that step, just sort of bite the bullet and speak to someone new, and you realize that it's actually not that scary. And once you get into the habit of putting time in people's diaries and making those interactions, you'll find it easier and easier to network, and you'll just see the impact that has on your career with regards to the number of opportunities that are exposed to you. Platforms like LinkedIn are another great example of doing this on a more sort of digital scale, particularly if you sort of live in smaller cities where sometimes you don't have access to those in-person networks in sort of bigger cities like London, for example. It's a great way of, like, you can create content and post on LinkedIn, and really, if you sort of use it more actively, i.e. dropping a comment as opposed to just hitting the like button, just sharing an insight that someone might find useful. It's the same sort of principle just transferred into the sort of digital domain, and that's exactly where the future is going. So yes, it's important to sort of have those in-person networking opportunities. We can equally transfer that sort of knowledge across into the digital domain on platforms like LinkedIn. So yeah, that's everything from me, and hopefully we'll get some networking conversations sort of sparked amongst everyone listening today.
That's such good, practical, brilliant advice, and you've absolutely added value to everybody there, Haider. Thank you very much indeed for that. Yeah, rounds of applause all round. I think that's you've covered so many things, so thank you. What I'm going to ask now is that we have a quick question and answer session, and I'm also going to put in the chat the link to the survey that we asked people to complete. So please could you make sure that you do that before we finish today? That would be great. And whilst you're thinking of questions you'd like to ask Haider or Ross, do put those in the chat. We've had one in already. And Ross, this one has come in for you. And it was going back to the comfort, stretch and stress zone. And the question is, how do you know you're near the limit of the stretch zone without passing into the stress zone and maybe burning out?
Yeah, well, the first thing to that, there's two aspects to it for me. The first thing is that self-awareness. Am I just doing too much? We talk about stress, frequency, intensity, and duration. If you've got those components working almost against each other, then you're going to get some internal things from your body. Maybe you're getting irritable, maybe you're getting a bit quiet, maybe you're getting a bit angry. And all those behaviors that aren't your norm, they're good indicators, first line indicators that you're actually just surviving rather than thriving. So we talked about before that unconscious, incompetent, and all those sort of quadrants. So you're maybe not operating the top right where you're thriving, and you're feeling compromised, and those physical signs in your body and your mannerisms, your behaviors, that's the first sign. The other sign I'd be looking for is results. So if your results aren't coming in the way they should be, then maybe you've gone straight into that red zone and you're pushing things, almost gambling stuff, and maybe not preparing as much, but you're on the edge. And we don't want to be on the edge for too long, because we're not going to get consistent results. You might get away with it once or twice, but you're not going to get away with it consistently. So feel for yourself internally, and your mannerisms, your behaviors, your emotions, your thinking, but also your results will give you a great indication about that as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And Heather, one for you around, and congratulations on the presentation, it's nice comments too. Any book recommendations for self-developing and finance related?
Oh, I've actually got loads here, so let me have a read at some titles. So let's have a look. The 5 a.m. Club is a really good read. I've just finished reading a book called You Coach You, which is all about almost like how you can apply the principles of coaching to yourself in your career, which I really recommend. Particularly, it's got different sections on things like purpose, or there's basically different categories of different types of challenges you might navigate in your career, and how to kind of the types of questions you can ask to kind of help you get a bit unstuck without actually having a separate person as a coach. It's almost like, how do you coach yourself out of those situations? So really recommend that. Atomic Habits is another favorite of mine. I think that's very transferable in terms of habit building in general. You can sort of apply that in a work sense and outside of work. What else have I got on my bookshelf? The 4-Hour Work Week, Deep Work by Cal Newport. What else?
Loads there.
Yeah, loads there. I'm just trying to think of one more.
Ross, any from you as well?
I always quote Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Yeah, I think, you know, find your level. What suits you, and only one tip I'll give you: don't necessarily go for if you're struggling with books, reading books, don't go for a bigger, thicker book, because if you struggle with it, you probably won't finish it. So it sounds silly, but go for ones that you can get through, you can read it, and then develop your interest and momentum that way. And an example would be Daniel Goleman's about emotional intelligence. Yeah, it's just like mammoth. And I didn't get through it. And I just thought, whoa, this is beyond me. So don't get put off by the size of something, but try and go for the smaller ones.
Well, very good recommendations, both of you. Thank you. And one question in either of you actually on this one, maybe to Heather first. How do you know, all of those suggestions that you're coming up with are great, and they're saying, how do you balance it? How do you balance that with working full time and studying for your apprenticeship and qualifications, and trying to do everything without getting overwhelmed and still have fun?
Yeah, so I think with the voluntary side of the kind of project spectrum, I try and find opportunities within work, because I think most companies will usually have some kind of like um, either allowance with regards to like you've got like a day almost you can use for a voluntary activity, or like a department that specifically focuses on like community investment or educational outreach. So that can be a good way of like bringing it, sort of doing these activities through work, so they actually know what you're up to, and perhaps using some of your actual work time to go into your local community if you wanted to do it that way. If you were doing projects sort of outside of work, I think time blocking is a really great technique, because I think you realize you actually have more time than you think. Sorry, you think you have less time than you actually have when you don't time block. For example, your hours just seem to slip by. But if you physically block the time in, you realize you make an active effort to show up. So whether that's for revision, for example, you might block out a specific hour on that day to revise, and you're more likely to show up and do the work than if you were to just say, oh, I should probably revise today and I'll try and do it this evening. You'll find the time sort of just slips away. Whereas if you define a start and end date, you actually commit to doing it. And there's a lot of work around sort of tasks taking sort of as long as you allocate them. It's the name just gone from the top of my head now. Ross might know, with regards to the effect of basically like time just expanding to basically the set of time you allocate. Sorry, the length of time a task takes just expands to the amount of time you allocate it. So if you say, okay, I'm going to read through all my emails and allocate an hour, it'll take you an hour to do it. Whereas if you say, actually, I'm just going to whiz through them in 15 minutes, it will take 15 minutes. It's that you will just find yourself working more efficiently based on the amount of time you allocate. So if you feel like you've got lots of different hats, which is something I definitely relate to, because as an apprentice, I was basically a student, an employee, a volunteer at some points. And yeah, it can definitely be stressful, but I recommend just being super organized and like blocking out time in your diary. Google Calendar is like my best friend. If it's not in my calendar, I'm not doing it. Basically, any social events, anything, I try and just keep as organized as possible so that I can sort of toggle between all those different hats.
Really good answer. Thank you for that. I think we've got time for one last one. And Ross, to you, would you say that the same techniques for showing confidence would be suitable for women in finance? Do you feel that you need to tailor advice given to women due to the negative opinions on more outspoken women?
No, I just hearing that question makes me sort of push back a little bit. You know, we're all equal in the workplace. And once we start thinking about someone's perception of you, that can influence and affect your emotional confidence. So I wouldn't be going down that route, really. I just want to just sort of segue a little bit away from that, because I heard what Haider was saying before, and I want to make this point before we finish today. And I think Haider mentioned it about, you know, growing through a challenge rather than going through it, growing through it. And when you're growing through something, you're not the finished product. So as a practical tip, as I'm always trying to be very practical, when you've going through something or growing through something, and you have a chance to reflect, just think about the positive things that happened rather than going straight to the negatives. So I challenge you to always think, first of all, what's the positive come out of it? And that will frame then your whole experiences. So that's the first point that what I mentioned from Haider's there. And you're right, Haider, you've referenced me quite a bit, and I want to give you a bit of referencing back here, because when the biggest networking organization in the world is called BNI, Business Network International, thousands of branches, and they have a phrase called givers gain. So the givers gain eventually. And I think that's something that's very pertinent. And then to finish off with, I saw in the chat box, what book we recommend from Brené Brown? I read it about 5 years ago, Brave in the Wilderness. Nice and simple read and not too thick, which I quite like. Thanks, Jenny.
Brilliant. Well, I can absolutely see why both of you are experts in your field and have all the accolades that you both do. And we're really honoured to have had you speaking to us today. So thank you for that. Do join us next time. We are getting together on the 30th of March with a speaker called Helen Snape, who is talking to us about healthy relationships. So that's the next one coming up on the 30th of March, same time. Look forward to seeing you then, and have a really good rest of the day. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll stop the recording now. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Look at those chats coming in.